Imagine a day where children are guided and nurtured in a way that honors their unique humanness. A day where, instead of being expected to change in order to fit in, children can be met right where they're at. Welcome to Where They're Planted, a podcast for parents and care providers of unique children. Caring for a child with a developmental, emotional, or behavior challenge, a neurodiverse brain, or difficult early life experiences can be confusing and exhausting. On this podcast, we'll help your child flourish and strengthen their roots by helping you not only understand them, but also gain the skills to help them bloom where they're planted. We'll use brain science, nervous system tools, collaborative strategy sessions, and a deep understanding of the developmental process to create a fertile environment around your child in order to nurture their growth. I am your host, Jen Bluske, an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience and a parent coach. My most closely held title, however, is that of a single mom of 2 thriving adopted kids, so I have walked this walk. I am truly excited to share, teach, and dive into these important topics on each episode.
Welcome back to Where They're Planted. I am your host, Jen Bluske. Today, we are going to dig into playfulness in parenting. Most of us strive to be playful in our parenting, but what does this really mean? How do we embody playfulness as parents as we work to do so many other things in our day? Manage the schedule, cook the food, deal with the homework, and the myriad other daily tasks that often pull us as adults out of playfulness. What if we have different ways of playing than our children? What if you find that it's hard to slow down and enjoy play with our kids? We strive to take a look today at ways of playing and why play is so important for our children's development as well as the relationship. And maybe allow you to walk away with a few ideas or curiosity to add playfulness back into your day. We are here today with Laura Hewitt, occupational therapist at Children's Therapy Network, and one of my trusted colleagues whom I have worked with for over 10 years. Laura's specialty in her treatment is meeting children right where they are at through playfulness, humor, and shared joy. She incorporates pretend themes, challenge, and a deep sense of relational safety in her play, and is fondly known as Dr. Evil OT, or alternatively as that fun lady, to many of the clients she sees. I'm excited to dig into play with Laura today. Welcome, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start by just talking about the components of play, or what play means to you in your mind.
Gosh, that's a good question, because play is one of those things that's notoriously hard to define well, right?
Yep.
But for me, and when I'm working with my clients, play usually means joining in with whatever the child finds joy with, right? And for some of our kids, that might look really different than the traditional play. But I'm going to notice what sparks them a little bit, what they enjoy, and I'm going to join that and use that as the starting point for my play. As an adult joining in play with a child, I'm going to use my affect, so my very positive facial expressions, excitement, or if we're playing an imaginary game, my scared face and my happy face and my suspicious face are all going to be exaggerated. And I'm going to play this dance between joining my child and playing with them, but also being mindful of kind of appropriate boundaries and containment, because I still need to be present, to be making it feel safe.
Yeah. Wow. You just said so much there. Okay. Let's break this down.
Sorry.
So
Yeah.
I'm hearing a couple of components of play that you're highlighting, and I think that I'd like to talk about them in the way that they maybe support kids' development. So as parents, as I alluded to in the intro, play can sometimes feel really hard and sort of like lost time. Sometimes when we're with our kids, if we're busy or overwhelmed, or if we've lost our playfulness, or if we find play different. And so I heard you say affect. Let's talk about how shared affect and play can help support development, shift what kids are able to do.
Yeah, through all the fancy brain research, we actually know that especially social emotional development is really supported through relationship with our primary caregiver. And even more than the words we say, our affect. So the tone of our voice, the expression on our face, our body language. And for some of our clients, where it's harder for them to tune into that. We can use our play and our affect strategically and lovingly to make that feel safer for them and help them grow in those ways. So that positive engagement and that back and forth and that shared joy, play is really not wasted time. I get that parent life is busy, but we can have playful interactions in whatever we're doing, and that's going to support their development and their communication and their flexibility and things like that.
Well, and it's so interesting because in our last episode on relational safety, we talked about how I think it's 80 to 90% of information that we get from another person is nonverbally versus verbally.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of using sort of play where there's not a demand or an expectation or, anything to practice reading those nonverbals and practice maybe matching our nonverbals, our affect to what we intend is really a way for kids to have safety in learning about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, play plays so many functional developmental roles for kids. One is learning skills. One is having relationship safety, and then practicing regulation, practicing shared control, practicing transitions, because we might shift what we're doing from here to there. And, there's lots of really functional, useful skills that we can get at through play. And it feels safe because usually with play, the stakes are pretty low, right? Because we're just playing. But we can practice those skills. And I often tell parents that we're going to work on these skills like going up in our regulation and then coming down and coming up in our regulation, coming down. We're going to do that playfully. So when the stakes are higher, we have a little bit more emotional muscle memory.
Yeah, we have some bandwidth. And I've also heard you allude a few times now to the idea of setting a container or setting a boundary in play, which sort of seems counterintuitive, right? Play should be this free-flowing, open time, some of us think. And what does that look like in play?
It varies on the kind of play. So if we're doing big body play.
So like wrestling.
Running around a playground, just big physical play. My boundaries are going to focus on physical safety for the child and for myself. If we're playing dodgeball, I'm like, oh, this is super fun. We're going to aim for the shoulders and below. No headshots.
Right.
And so I'm joining in this activity that kids love, and I'm putting some really reasonable limits and boundaries on it. And if it's hard for a kid to do that, I'm not going to get punitive. I'm just going to be like, oh, it is so hard to not do that. We're going to do something different.
Okay. So you might just keep the connection, stay playful, but sort of guide the engagement.
Yep, exactly. Or if we're playing something much more structured, like a board game, some kids really, 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 really hate to lose. It's a big one. We could spend a whole episode on that one. But this is where we can start to practice some of that flexibility or micro losses. But if a kid wants to be creative with how the rules are interpreted, that might be a point of discussion. In our family, does each one of us get a turn to bend the rules, but just one? So we don't have to stick to the strict rules of the game as they're written on the board. But we can have that conversation. Or sometimes it's okay to lose, and you can model that. Or if the kid loses and they're sad, you can support that. You can just support it. Ironically, during the pandemic, I learned to re-love the card game of war. I would play it a lot with kids on screen, and I modified it so each of one of us would have a deck of cards, and we would each hold them up, and whoever was bigger, that went into their win pile, and if it was smaller, it went into their lose pile. And we would go through the card deck once, and then you would count up how many were in your win pile. But what I loved about that, it was 52 micro wins and losses.
Yeah. I'm also assuming that you're timing and pacing that.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of anticipation, okay. And if we've got a tie, we modified it. So it was just what's the next card? If your next card is higher, you get both of them. And so we would pull them up together. And so there was joining that way. I used to hate that game. And now I'm and also maybe because it was time limited, because we each had a deck. And so we would go through it once.
Oh, it doesn't last for 20 minutes.
It doesn't last for hours potentially.
It's so interesting because I was just playing with a client the other day and we were playing Chutes and Ladders. And, I'm thinking about this idea of setting boundaries, but because it's play, we can have curiosity and we can shift rules and we can flow within the boundaries. And this client of mine also really, the idea of losing is really hard. And, they got to, I don't know, what is the number on Chutes and Ladders where you go down the big slide? I think it was like 92. 86. It's 86. She got to 86. And the end of the world came because they knew they were going to slide to the end and they weren't going to win anymore. And because it was play, I was able to just be like, we made it all the way to 86. Wow. And we moved on.
Yeah.
And we were able to sort of be in a playful state around this goofy shift in rules that I came up with.
Right. Yeah. And similarly, like something that I will sometimes do with those board games, like Candyland's another classic one where like fortunes can shift quickly, right? And if you're back in like the gumdrop swamp or whatever it is, I'll use my affect to be like, oh man, that's so hard. Gosh. And so I can mimic having a big response, but actually staying regulated, right? And being curious, because it can change for anybody at any time. Like, it looks like I'm way ahead, but you never know. I could go back to that first one at any moment.
And so in this way, when we're talking about sort of these boundaries within play and, how do we shift boundaries and be curious about boundaries and sometimes set boundaries with physical safety. And I'm hearing that the quality of play takes it out of, I am telling you what to do. I am directing you as a parent or as an adult and giving you a lesson.
Yeah. I mean, I think parents often get caught in that trap of my job as a parent is to teach you, which is not untrue, but teaching can happen in much more subtle, playful, and joyful ways, right? Actually, I think an important component of play that I didn't highlight was that it's co-created.
Yeah.
It's something you're creating together. And so, as we talk about co-regulation, as we talk about that relationship, play inherently supports that because it's something you guys do and create together. And for the listeners, in my life, I've done a fair amount of improv comedy, and there's lots of structured games. And I've brought some of those into clinic. And one of the ones I love is one called Story. And I'll sit with a parent and a child, and I'll like, child, give me some characters. Parent, give me a location. All right, what do they want or what's the problem? And then I'll point, and when I'm pointing to them, they have to start telling the story. And then I'll shift it over. And the person has to like pick up the ideas that the other person started and keep telling the story. And it's so fun because even some of my kids who really, really struggle with having a lot of control, often because their ideas are being picked up on and elaborated on, and that gives them a new idea. They can pick that up and go, and they turn wacky and weird and silly, and usually people have a lot of fun doing them. That's sort of a semi-structured way to really create a shared, joyful, ridiculous thing.
Yeah, shared experience. And the other thing I'm hearing that I think is important to talk about is within this idea of play. When you're playing with somebody, you're often really seeing them.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I really see you in this moment.
Yes. And I think so many of our kids, maybe some of their foundational skills are different, like the way their sensory system interacts with the world, or their motor planning skills are different than most. And so either the play skills that you would typically associate with kids their age might look limited or just really different, or because they have super specific special interests. So what brings their brain joy and feels playful to them looks really atypical to somebody else, right? Out of the norm. But like, if you can honor that that's what gives your child joy and sparks that energy and share that with them and join with them, I think they feel seen and they feel validated. And that has got so much power in helping them feel like they've got worth. And their most important people see them and can at least appreciate what they appreciate.
Well, and being seen, right, creates safety, creates relational safety. It creates agency.
Absolutely.
I have agency on the world, as opposed to the world is just always happening to me. Especially for our kids who have some unique differences, who the world does tend to happen to them a lot, right? The world moves at such a fast pace and the expectations are so tied in sometimes that the idea that I can have effect on another person and create joy in another person is sometimes the power, I feel like, of
absolutely.
that shared joy. I want to bring this a little bit to daily routines with parents. We've talked about all the reasons why play is good and the components of play, and there's so many more. How do we actually think about supporting play? I remember, I have teenagers now, so play is real different. But when my kids were little, I remember thinking, if I have to play dollhouse again, I might run away, right? And like, I do this for a living, and it wasn't fun for me. And so finding ways to incorporate play where there truly is reciprocity. How do we do that?
Right. And I'll make a little side note. I think caregivers engaging playful with their children is exceedingly important. I can't overstate it. And you don't have to always play with your child every time they want it.
And you don't always have to sit down and play with your child to be playful.
Right. And so, for instance, take the morning routine. If your child is at a developmental space where you need help to adjust them, like you can be playful in how that happens.
Yes. Let's give some examples of that.
Yeah. So like, how fast can I count the toes before I put that sock on? Or am I going to count the toes and get the wrong number? What? Before that's no. And then I'm going to put the sock on. Or am I going to work with the shirt and like try and put it on their arm or put it on their knee and kind of just be silly, not to overextend the dressing routine, but to create that playful engagement. Or if I have to move from point A to point B in the house, like if I have the child has to move from the bedroom to the bathroom, can you walk there like a bear, or can we play red light, green light to that? And sometimes for our kids where transitions are hard, having something playful and purposeful is actually a really great strategy, honestly.
It takes us out of that brain space of expectation and puts us in the brain space of connection.
Yes, exactly. Transitioning out of the clinic, for instance, for lots of our kids, that's often hard. And I'm always like, are we going to play red light, green light? Or are you going to try and push me all the way down the hall to the front door? And so either way, I'm connecting with the kid. Either way, I'm structuring it so they move from point A to point B. And they're having fun. And they can have the transition. And the more successful transitions they have, the easier it gets over time.
And they're regulating too, right? We're finding a way to regulate, even through humor, in order to do something that feels hard, which, man, if we could all learn how to do that, right?
Right. Or the other thing that I often think about for families and family life is that dinner time hour. Blood sugar is super important. So they have to have enough blood sugar levels on board to be not a monster.
Yep.
But like if you're working on dinner and your attention has to be there, I love like those playful things where you're engaged with the kid, but you don't actually have to be doing it. So for instance, scavenger hunt. Like, can you go find something round, something red, and something that you wear? And so they have to go off and go find those three things and bring them back to you.
Yeah.
And you get to keep cooking and getting dinner on the table. Or challenges, like if they've got play space within sight, like, if you've got like a great room, how high of a tower can you build with couch cushions? So you give them structured, fun challenges.
Mm-hmm. To be clear, because it's play, they don't have to complete the challenge. They can come back.
Or it doesn't have to look perfect.
Exactly. They can come back and say, no, I actually want to see if I can get from here to here. Oh, good idea.
Oh,
right?
Cool.
And because it's play,
show me.
Exactly. We have this back and then this forth, and we have this negotiation, which is what we're trying to teach kids a little bit.
And the negotiation is not about power.
Correct.
It's about enjoying an experience together.
Yeah.
And so this is also, I talked about the adults in the play in a relationship having some reasonable boundaries on the play either for physical safety or sort of like just sort of social norms or whatever. But this is also a lovely way for parents or caregivers to model flexibility.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We ask our kids to be flexible all the time, and it's often really hard for them. And play is a really safe space for our caregivers to model flexibility and show how it can happen.
That's just lovely. Yes. So if we're going to give our parents a few takeaways, if they're listening today and they're like, man, play has been hard for me. I want to see if I can show up a little bit more in play. So what are those takeaways?
Yeah, that's a good question, because so many of our parents are tired and they have their bandwidth is razor thin. Mm-hmm. I would start with something simple and in a setting where it's pretty contained, like the car.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
And so this is a moment where everybody's actually literally contained.
Literally contained. Mm-hmm.
There's a time limit, and maybe this is the time when we can play I Spy or sing silly songs or do a shared story or make weird noises with our mouths. What's the weirdest noise you can make?
So I hear you saying a way to start is to think about one tiny little part of your day.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And during that tiny little part of your day, what are all the ways you could be silly and goofy and connected with your child?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. And kids often have a lovely idea of how that can happen too.
Oh, kids have way better ideas than us.
They have way better ideas, honestly.
We pick up a toy and we see like the intended function of it, and they pick up a toy and they see 27 ways that I've never thought of playing with said toy, and that's just lovely. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
I know one way that you are supporting play with parents is, you had alluded to improv earlier. And so if you're in the area, Laura's going to be doing sort of an improv class with families this summer. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's a fairly short-term class. So it's like 2 evenings over 2 successive weeks. I'm calling it an improv for family fun and connection class, for a parent and a child to come and learn some relatively structured games that really support connecting, joy, flexibility, sharing control, but mostly just having fun. And we'll talk about ways to make it more challenging for our kids that need that, or to help make it more supported for our kids that need that. We've done improv groups in the past for just kids, and that's been lovely, but I'm super excited about shifting what we're doing now to support that family connection
that
piece.
Relationship.
Yeah. And I bring little bits of it into session a lot, and it can be really, really fun.
I'm excited for it. If you're in the Madison area and you're interested, I will leave some information in the show notes about that. And I'm so grateful that you got on and talked to me about play today, Laura. Thanks so much.
This was super fun.
All
right. Thanks for playing.
No problem. Bye-bye.
If you like what you heard today, check out our Empowered Parent Coaching course offered through Thriving Parents Collective. In this course, you will get videos and course content to help you learn and develop the strategies you seek to meet your child right where they're at. Go to the show notes for the link. Where They're Planted is a Lit Path Studios podcast and is produced by Jamie Gale and Jen Bluske. Music is by Gaston Reen and Pod 5. Thank you for loving your child right where they're planted.